Okay, so of course, all cells have to not only communicate with each other, but they also have to sometimes work together and stay together, in order to make a organism function. So extracellular components, that's everything that the cell puts outside of itself into the environment, and connections between the cells help to coordinate those cell activities, help to hold them together, as well as to get them to respond the same way towards a stimulus, that kind of thing. Most cells synthesize and secrete materials that are to be released to the external sides of the cell of the plasma membrane or cell membrane. So the easy way to say this, I think, is that cells are factories, right? And when cells are making something like a protein or a membrane or a fat or a carbohydrate on the inside, they sometimes want to send it outside of themselves in order to help the rest of the body, right? If we're talking about multicellular organism anyway. So these extracellular structures, the ones that we're talking about here include the cell walls of plants, the extracellular matrix or the ECM of animal cells, and also intercellular junctions, which we're going to be talking about that hold cells together. So, whoops, did I go too fast? Yep, I sure did. Okay, so cell walls of plants, let's start there. The cell wall is an extracellular structure, right? So in other words, it's made outside that distinguishes plant cells from animal cells. Now, I shouldn't, go too far in this. Fungi have cell walls. Some bacteria, they're considered cell walls, but plants are for sure different than animals, as far as how they work and how they protect themselves by the walls. So the cell wall protects the plant cell, maintains its shape, and prevents excess uptake of water. Okay, so in other words, it's not going to let the cell get too full of water, and therefore, sometimes bad things can happen to cells if too much water goes in them. Plant cell walls are made of cellulose fibers. We talked about that in the last unit, right? It's sugar put together as a polymer, but the functional groups are on the opposite sides, right? So there are also other things besides just the cellulose that make up the cell wall. They would be polysaccharides, right, which are like starches, and proteins, which are also in pretty much every cell membrane and cell wall. Plant cell walls have multiple layers, right? I am not going to ask you honestly the difference between all these little tiny layers here. We don't have a microscope to see them when we're all at distance, so I think that's okay. Just suffice to say that it is a relatively thick, rigid, protective, wall that goes around the cells, and it's got holes in it. Okay, so you might think, why is it a good wall if it has holes in it? Well, plant cells in a plant tissue need to communicate with each other, right? So if you were walling up all the cells and not letting anything pass between them, that would really kind of make communication very difficult. Plasmodesmata, see how it's bolded? I would know that one, are channels between adjacent plant cells. So imagine, you have two rooms together, right? If you had two rooms, brick walls around each of them, it would be really hard to actually, get anything past it between the two cells. Now, sometimes cells want to share things. So what you would do is put little channels in the cell wall, right, in between the brick walls, and then you can pass things back and forth. That's pretty much what plasmodesmata are. Okay, so if you look here, this is just going to show you the cell walls. This is actually an electron micrograph, so these are really real cell walls, sorry. Um, but what it is showing in here, in addition to all the other stuff we've talked about with cells, right? And it's a little bit hard to see. These here are the plasmodesmata. So these are little channels that basically go through the cell wall so that cells can share materials, hormones, chemicals, all that kind of thing. All right, so the extracellular matrix of animal cells is a little different. Animal cells do not have cell walls, so it's not really considered to be a true cell wall. But they are covered by an elaborate extracellular matrix. That means cells are secreting stuff that they're living in themselves, right? So that matrix can vary quite a bit, but it's made of primarily glycoproteins. There's those glycoproteins again. So that's half sugar, half protein, and other macromolecules, right? A lot of proteins are out there too, just regular proteins, not glycoproteins. So functions of the extracellular matrix are support, adhesion, movement, and regulation. Our cells, since we're animals, right, humans, have much different matrices, much different or extracellular matrices, depending on where they are in the body, right? So to give you an example, like blood cells, right? Blood cells kind of look like little donuts that aren't all the way pushed in all the way, right? And then you have the big white cells and stuff that go and get germs. They're all floating around and going through your blood in a liquid, and that liquid would be plasma, right? That's the non-cellular component of your blood. That's considered a matrix. Okay, so the cells make it. It's full of everything that we talked about in the last slide. So it's full of proteins and it's full of nutrition. It's also full of hormones. There's all kinds of things in this matrix, and most of them are made by the cells that live in it. Okay, so that's really what we're talking about here. Okay, so as you can see, here's a cell membrane, right? Plasma membrane, same thing, right? You have all the proteins that are stuck in the cell membrane, as you can see, and then all of this craziness going on the outside, right? What are these things? Well, they're generally proteins. Proteins are everywhere, as I told you before, and also glycoproteins, right? So, in other words, sort of like half sugar, half protein molecules that can help with adhesion and identity and all the stuff we talked about on the previous slide. So, I want to sort of like pay attention to that feathery part that I just went back here. So you see all of these little feathers that are sticking out of the outside. These are the polysaccharide, or really the sugar part of the protein, right? So, you can see the little carbohydrates sticking out the end, and then that protein sort of like going down the center, as you can see right over here, right? So you can call this a proteoglycan, or you can also call it a glycoprotein. There's subtle differences. For our purposes, we're just going to talk about them as they're the same thing. Okay, so why? Why have these things? They give cells identity, right? So this is really important. If we're talking about medicine, say one of you guys needed a kidney, right? You had some issue, some kidney disease, you need to have it removed, or both kidneys removed, and you needed a kidney in order to live. You can't just slap any old kidney into yourself because sometimes they're not compatible, right? Sometimes your body looks at it as really not supposed to be there, and therefore it'll try to reject it. And what that means is really your immune system tries to destroy anything that doesn't think it's supposed to, or anything that is not supposed to be there according to your immune system. So what you need to do is to match these glycoproteins, right? These as closely as possible between the donor and the recipient organ. And if the match is good enough, the body will tolerate, having a completely different person's organ put into your body, right? So that's a really important thing to consider. These also act as adhesion proteins, right? So in other words, they act almost kind of like a glue to hold the cell in place in a tissue or, in some part of the body. So intercellular junctions, as far as how animal cells do it, are kind of like plasmodesmata in plants, but they're a little bit more diverse. It's not just like a hole through the wall. So when we talked about plasmodesmata, here's the cell walls, right? And you can see these little channels. This is a little bit better picture than I showed you before. These little channels that are going to allow substances from one cell to go to the other and back and forth, right? So these cells can communicate. The interior of the two cells, in other words, can share things. And that's a really good thing for plant cells to be able to do. Animal cells, on the other hand, have a whole bunch of different types of connections here. And I would say that right here is what you want to pay attention to. Okay, so tight junctions are kind of like stitching. I always try to make like a clothes analogy here because cell membranes are kind of like a fabric, right? So tight junctions are basically proteins that stitch together cell membranes really, really tightly so that nothing can pass in between cells. Okay, so think about it because if you're talking about like the intestines, you don't want all that stuff in your intestines necessarily to get to your bloodstream. See this capillary down here? So if, this is where your digested food or even worse, waste would be, all that bacteria could slip in between cells, go into your blood, and literally kill you. People that get in car accidents that have tears in their intestines, right? In other words, they tear these tight junctions, get bacteria into their blood, and can die of sepsis. So sometimes it's not the accident that kills you directly. Your own gut bacteria can get in there and cause problems, right? So that's what we call tight junctions. Desmosomes, so you see these little things kind of like, kind of like fluttering with all these little proteins sticking out of them. Like if tight junctions were stitching, desmosomes would be like buttons. Okay, so you can see a nice discrete little connection point here and here that are going in between the cells, and that acts much like plasmodesmata in plants. It allows the cells, or I'm sorry, this acts as a button which adheres the cell membranes together. Gap junctions act like plasmodesmata in plants. So you can see very, very tiny here, but there's little holes that are punched in between adjacent cell membranes. What that'll allow to happen is material to go back and forth between cells, right? So you can have one cell, oh, I don't know, might be producing a hormone or something like that, and that'll go into the next cell to cause the change, right? So these, the tight junctions, desmosomes, and gap junctions, oh, to finish my close analogy, gap junctions are kind of like grommets, right? So you know what a grommet is? It's kind of like a button with a hole in the middle, right? Think about like last time you wore a hoodie, it's the what the string goes through, right? Still connects fabric, but allows things to pass through the middle, right? So desmosomes are like buttons, and tight junctions are like stitching, where you have that really, really tight connection. Think like what holds the back pocket of your jeans on? Well, it's just stitched, right? Nothing can slip through that if you put something small in there, right? Okay. So as you can see here, it's a little bit better of picture. I'm just throwing this in here because this is the last picture of our presentation for today. So that tight junction is going to stitch everything around the outside. Very, very tight, just like the stitching on the pocket that holds, or sorry, the stitching that holds the pocket on your jeans. Desmosomes, more like buttons, right? So they're literally holding two cell membranes together, two adjacent cell membranes together by kind of buttoning them together. And you can see the little proteins and stuff that are going off to the sides in these pictures, okay? Gap junctions are holes that still hold cell membranes together. So that, again, that's like a grommet, right? So that'll allow material to go back and forth in between cells so that all those cells kind of know what's up, right? They know they can all communicate and they can figure out what that tissue is supposed to do. Okay, whew. 76 slides. Okay, so we got that done. We do have to talk a little bit more about the cell membrane, okay, which I'm going to post and we'll kind of see how it goes. I mean, I know this is a lot of content this week, and I think we're up to, I think this is video number 8, so that's 2 hours of stuff already. What I would do, break it down into small sections, maybe watch one in the morning, one at night, or something like that, or however you want to do it. But I do think that it's worthwhile to watch these. Okay. Um, Again, I'll have office hours up this week. So if you want to go over anything, I haven't had a whole lot of takers yet, but if you want to go over anything, I just want to let you know that I'm here for you, and I will be happy to explain anything that needs to be explained. Okay, so watch for that. Well, you'll see this, I guess, on the module, and hope to see you sometime this week. Have a good one.